You're not going to believe what happened next. I had no idea that a quiet morning on my property would turn into a confrontation with the local HOA and a Karen who thought she could control everything. It all started when Laura Harper, the president of the HOA, walked up to me, a clipboard in hand, with that smug smile of hers. "You're not part of the Lake Association yet?" she asked, as if it were her business. I simply said, "No, I'm not interested." That's when her smile faltered. "You should be. We're making improvements to the area. It's time for you to join." But what she didn't know: I own the lake. It's all mine, handed down through generations. Laura didn't take kindly to my refusal, and that's when she pulled out her phone. "I'll just call the cops," she said, as if that would scare me. She called 911 right there, in front of me, as if I was some criminal for not joining her HOA. My blood was boiling. She was crossing the line, and she had no idea who she was dealing with. I'm not just some guy who gives up easily. This lake is my family's legacy, and I'll fight to keep it that way. As the police car pulled up, I stood tall, feeling the weight of my property under my feet. Laura thought she could bully me into submission, but she couldn't have been more wrong. I walked right up to the officer, calm and collected, with one simple statement. "You might want to check the deed, officer." The cop looked confused, so I pulled out the paperwork. "This lake? It's mine. All of it." Laura's face went pale. She never expected that. She thought she could control the land, control the water, and force me into a deal. But it's not going to happen. Not on my watch. Stick around, this is just the beginning. After that morning with Laura, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something bigger was at play here. I've always been the quiet type, keeping to myself, taking care of the land that's been in my family for generations. It's a simple life, just me and my land, and the lake that's been a part of my family's history for as long as I can remember. My grandfather, who we all called Pops, bought this property back in 1955 when the city was just starting to grow. Austin wasn't the tech hub it is now. It was a quiet town, with a few barbecue joints, small businesses, and wide open spaces. Pops was a man who believed in hard work, respecting the land, and preserving what mattered. He built the dam that fed the lake, carefully managing the water for the cattle and the local community. I spent most of my childhood running cattle across these fields, learning how to fish in the lake, and even hunting in the woods. There's something about this place, it's in my bones. When I came home from my second deployment in Afghanistan, I had one goal: to finally spend time here, to get back to my roots and reconnect with what matters. The property was left to me after Pops passed away, and my sister Sarah, who lives in California, has been managing it while I've been away. She hired a property management company to handle the taxes and upkeep, and everything seemed fine until I came home. That's when I saw it. The construction crews. The survey stakes. The bright orange flags marking the land. Someone had decided this land was theirs to develop. I wasn't ready for what I found. I walked up to the construction foreman, trying to make sense of the situation. "This is Willowbrook Estates," he told me. "We've got all the permits to develop this land. The HOA's already approved everything." I stood there, stunned. The HOA? The Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association? That was the last thing I expected. I'd heard stories, of course, rumors about overbearing neighbors and ridiculous rules. But I never imagined they'd go this far. I tried to stay calm, asked to see the papers, but when I pulled out my phone to call my lawyer, that's when I saw her. Laura. She was riding up on her golf cart, looking like she owned the place. She smiled, that same fake smile, and said, "I'm sorry, honey. This is just part of the plan for the neighborhood. Your family abandoned this land. We're just improving it for the community." I could feel my blood boil, but I kept my cool. "I don't think you understand," I said. "This land isn't yours. It's mine. And I'm not going anywhere." Laura's smile disappeared for a second, and she narrowed her eyes. She didn't like being Told no. Not by me. Not by anyone. As I walked away, I could hear her muttering under her breath, probably already plotting her next move. I knew this wasn't over. I just didn't know how far she would take it. But one thing was clear, I wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. The following week, Laura came by again, this time with a stack of paperwork in hand, as if she was some sort of official. "I've been authorized to issue a formal notice," she said, her voice dripping with that same condescending sweetness. I raised an eyebrow, trying to keep my cool. She handed me the papers, and I scanned them quickly. It was an eviction notice, but not for me. It was for my land. She was claiming that I had abandoned it and that they were now in charge of managing the entire lakefront property as part of the HOA's plans for expansion. "You're not part of the community," she added, looking at me like I was a stranger in my own backyard. I laughed, shaking my head. "You're really going to try and take my land?" I asked. "You really think this is yours to control?" Laura's smile never wavered, but I could see the frustration building behind her eyes. She didn't like being questioned, especially not in front of anyone else. "The community voted," she said, pulling out a piece of paper. "We have the majority agreement to develop this area. You don't have a choice. You'll either comply, or we'll be forced to take legal action." Her tone was final, as if she had already won. I wasn't about to let that happen. Not without a fight. The next day, I went to the county records office. I needed to find out just how far Laura could push before I could push back. As I sifted through the files, I came across something that made my stomach drop: old land deeds, dating back to the 1950s. And there it was, clear as day, my family's name on the title, the lake officially registered as part of the property. It was more than just water, it was my inheritance. I left the office with the documents in hand, feeling a sense of power I hadn't felt in days. I wasn't about to let Laura or her HOA take what was rightfully mine. The next time I saw her, she was driving down the road in her usual white SUV, the windows rolled down. I stepped out into the yard, holding the deed in my hand. "Laura," I called out, waving the papers. "You might want to take a look at this." Her eyes flicked down at the document, and I saw the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. "What's this?" she asked, trying to mask the surprise in her voice. "It's the deed to the lake," I said, my voice steady. "It's mine. And you're going to have to get through me if you want to take it." The air between us felt thick, charged. She didn't say a word, just stared at me, probably calculating her next move. But I knew then that this wasn't going to be easy for her. I wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not when I had the law on my side. Laura didn't say another word. She just got back in her car and drove off, leaving me standing there with the deed to what was rightfully mine. The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls and emails. I had lawyers looking over the deed, and I could feel the tension in the air. Laura wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to accept that she'd lost control of the lake that easily. I knew I had to take things further, but I wasn't about to waste time in court unless I had to. I started talking to the other residents around the lake, asking questions, finding out if anyone else had been getting pushback from the HOA. Turns out, a lot of them had. Laura and her crew had been tightening their grip on the neighborhood for years, using the HOA as a way to force people into doing what they wanted. It wasn't just about the lake. It was about control, pure and simple. The more I learned, the more I realized I wasn't just fighting for my property anymore, I was fighting for everyone who had been bullied by this woman. I wasn't about to let her win. I called up Sarah, my sister, and filled her in on everything that had been happening. She wasn't exactly thrilled to hear that I was dealing with a legal mess, but she knew how important this land was to both of us. She promised to help however she could. The next morning, I woke up to find a letter in my mailbox. It was from Laura, of course. She was demanding that I hand over full control of the lake to the HOA, or else face legal action. It wasn't just a threat anymore, it was real. But I wasn't intimidated. I had the deed. I had the law on my side. So, I did what any reasonable person would do, I wrote back. I wasn't going to back down without a fight. My response was simple. This lake belongs to my family, and I'm not handing it over to anyone. If you think you can take it, you'll have to go through me. I signed the letter, folded it up, and sent it back to Laura. I knew she wasn't going to like it, but I didn't care. This was more than just property. This was about standing up for what was right. A few days later, I got a call from my lawyer. He'd received a copy of the letter from Laura's lawyer, demanding I vacate the lake or face a lawsuit. The case was moving forward. But I wasn't worried. I had the deed, and I had a community behind me. I knew this was far from over, but at least now I felt like I was in control. The fight had just begun. Things started to get more intense after that letter. Laura wasn't the type to back down, and I knew this was just the beginning. She was pushing hard now, trying to get her way at any cost. I had been talking to my lawyer regularly, getting advice and figuring out my next move. Every day, I felt the weight of the situation pressing on me more. The worst part was seeing how she treated the other neighbors. They were too afraid to speak up, but I knew they were just as tired of her control as I was. One evening, as I was sitting on my porch overlooking the lake, I saw Laura's SUV pull up again. This time, she didn't get out of the car. She just sat there for a few minutes, staring at my house. I had a bad feeling in my gut. She wasn't giving up, and she was getting desperate. A few days later, I received another letter, this one from her lawyer. It was an official threat, stating that if I didn't comply, I would face major legal fees and possible eviction from the property. They were going to try and use the legal system to force me out. At that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was about making sure she couldn't bully anyone else in the community ever again. I wasn't just standing up for my rights, I was standing up for everyone who had been too afraid to speak out. The next day, I called a meeting with a few of the neighbors. I knew if we were going to beat her, we'd have to work together. To my surprise, a lot of them were on my side. They were all tired of the way Laura had been running things. We started making plans to fight back, legally and publicly. I wasn't about to let her intimidate me, and I wasn't about to let her destroy the community. We needed to gather as much evidence as possible. I started keeping a detailed log of every interaction with Laura and her HOA, every letter, every threat. My lawyer helped me organize everything, making sure I had a solid case if it came to court. At the same time, I began researching the rules about HOAs and their powers. The more I learned, the more I realized that Laura had been abusing her position for years. She had no legal ground to demand anything from me. That realization gave me the confidence I needed to push forward. I wasn't going to lose. I would fight this to the end, no matter what it took. With the support of my neighbors, the legal backing, and the evidence I knew I had the upper hand now. I just had to wait for the right moment to strike. The fight for the lake was far from over, but at least I finally felt like I had a chance to win. The days went by, and I could feel the pressure mounting. Every time I saw Laura or heard from her, the tension grew. She wasn't backing down, and neither was I. But I knew that I had to be patient. I had the law on my side, and I wasn't about to let her push me around anymore. One evening, as I was working late in my garage, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I looked outside and saw Laura's SUV parked near my property line again. This time, she wasn't alone. She had a man with her, a lawyer, I assumed. My heart sank. I knew this was it. They were going to try something big. I walked out to meet them, trying to keep my cool, but I could feel the anger bubbling inside me. "Mr. Williams," Laura said with that same fake smile. "We've decided to take this to court. We're not going to let you continue to interfere with the development of this land. The HOA has spoken." I could see the lawyer standing beside her, clipboard in hand, ready to back her up. But I wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. "You can take this to court if you want," I said, my voice steady. "But the lake is mine. And I have the paperwork to prove it." I pulled out the deed and handed it to the lawyer, watching as his eyes scanned the document. I could tell he didn't expect me to have such solid proof. He looked up at me, clearly taken aback. This is legitimate," he said, almost to himself. Laura's expression shifted from smug confidence to a mix of frustration and disbelief. "What do you expect to do with that?" she asked, her voice cold now. "I expect you to stop trying to take what's mine," I replied. "And if you don't, I'll make sure the court knows exactly what you've been up to. You can't just push people around like this." The lawyer seemed to be thinking things over, glancing at Laura for confirmation. "You may want to reconsider your position," I added. "Because I'm not backing down." There was a long pause before Laura spoke again, but when she did, her voice was a lot less certain. "This isn't over," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We'll see you in court." She turned on her heel and walked back to her SUV, the lawyer following closely behind. As they drove off, I stood there for a moment, watching them leave. It felt like a victory, but I knew the real battle was just beginning. The legal fight was going to be long and hard, but now I felt ready. I had everything I needed to win. It wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, and I wasn't about to let Laura take that away from me. It was the following week when I received a call that shifted everything. My lawyer had finally gathered enough information to go on the offensive. He'd tracked down some old, obscure documents that were buried in the county archives. They were small details, things that the HOA had overlooked, but they were critical. The HOA had been trying to use zoning laws and old development agreements to push their project through, but these documents proved they had been manipulating the system. The evidence was undeniable. The land, including the lake, was clearly marked as belonging to my family, and not even the HOA's new zoning change could alter that. With this new information, the case was about to take a dramatic turn. It wasn't just about me protecting my property anymore, it was about exposing Laura's actions and stopping her from doing this to anyone else. I felt a new sense of determination. I spent the next few days preparing for the upcoming court hearing, gathering every bit of evidence I had. It wasn't just about the lake, it was about holding the HOA accountable for everything they'd done. Laura thought she had control, but she didn't know the full extent of the situation. As I sat in my office going over the paperwork one last time, I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come. It was hard to believe that just a few weeks ago, I was caught off guard, trying to figure out what was happening. Now, I was armed with everything I needed to take this to court. The day of the hearing arrived, and I was nervous but confident. I knew the truth was on my side. When I walked into the courtroom, Laura was already there, sitting across the room with her lawyer, looking as smug as ever. I could see the tension in her posture as she glanced over at me. She wasn't expecting me to come prepared. As the hearing began, I watched her try to present her case, speaking with that same air of superiority she always had. But when it came time for me to present my evidence, I could see the shift in the room. The documents I had gathered, along with my lawyer's arguments, began to make Laura's position crumble. Her confidence quickly faded. She tried to counter, but nothing she said could discredit the truth. The judge looked over everything, and it was clear that Laura's case didn't hold up. After a brief deliberation, the judge ruled in my favor. The lake, and the land it sat on, remained mine. Laura, visibly shaken, stood up and stormed out of the courtroom without saying a word. It was over. The fight had been long, but it was worth every minute. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. I had stood my ground, and I had won. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe easy. But I knew that this victory wasn't just mine, it was for everyone in the community who had been living in fear of Laura and the HOA's overreach. I had shown them that standing up for what's right was possible. I wasn't just protecting my land, I was protecting the future of this community. After the court hearing, I thought it was over. Laura had lost, the HOA's control over the lake had ended, and I could finally enjoy some peace. But I quickly realized that the aftermath wasn't going to be as simple as walking away. A few days later, I received an email from a local news outlet. They'd gotten wind of the court case and were asking for an interview. Apparently, word had spread, and the story of the small landowner standing up to the HOA had caught the public's attention. At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to make a bigger deal out of it. I had already won. But then I realized, this could be bigger than just me. It wasn't just about protecting my property anymore. It was about showing the community that they didn't have to put up with being bullied by people in power. The interview was set up for the next day. I felt nervous at first, but once I started talking, the words just flowed. I explained how I had inherited the property from my grandfather, the history behind the lake, and how Laura and her HOA had tried to take it from me. The reporter asked about the legal fight, and I went into detail about the documents I had uncovered, the evidence that exposed the HOA's misconduct, and how I'd stood my ground in court. By the time the interview was over, I felt a sense of relief. It was like I had done something important, not just for me, but for everyone who had dealt with an overbearing HOA. That night, the story aired. The phone rang off the hook the next morning. Friends, family, even strangers from the neighborhood reached out, all expressing their support. They told me they were proud of what I had done, that they wished they had the courage to stand up to the HOA like I had. It felt good, but there was something else, something deeper. It wasn't just about the recognition. It was about the change it sparked. People were talking. They were realizing that they didn't have to accept the power plays of a few individuals who thought they could control the whole neighborhood. More than one neighbor called me up, asking for advice about their own issues with the HOA. Some were dealing with ridiculous fines, while others were being pressured to sell their properties. I had no idea how deep the problem went. And then it hit me, this wasn't just my fight. It was a community issue. With the newfound attention, I started meeting with other homeowners, sharing my story, and helping them find ways to challenge the HOA. It wasn't going to be easy, but the more people I talked to, the more I realized we could take them down together. This was just the beginning. The lake wasn't the only thing I had to protect. It was time to take back the community. What started as a fight over land had turned into a movement for justice. And I was ready to lead it. After the story went public, I couldn't help but notice the change in the neighborhood. People were beginning to speak up more, sharing their own experiences with the HOA. Some had been harassed for minor violations, like a mailbox that wasn't the right shade of blue or grass that grew a little too tall. Others had been forced to pay outrageous fines for things they didn't even know were violations. It was clear now that Laura and her crew had been using the HOA as a tool to push their agenda, to control every little aspect of people's lives. It made me realize just how deep the problem went. As more people came forward, I could see a shift in the community. The fear was starting to fade. People were finding the courage to stand up, to fight back. And I knew I had to keep pushing. I couldn't let Laura win. A few weeks later, I organized a town hall meeting at the community center. I didn't know what to expect, whether people would show up or if they would be too afraid of retaliation, but I felt like it was time to take the next step. To my surprise, the room was packed. Neighbors, many of whom I had never even spoken to, filled the seats, all eager to share their stories. It was a powerful moment. We weren't just a group of individuals anymore. We were a community, united by a common goal, to take back control of our neighborhood. I stood up at the front, feeling the weight of the room's eyes on me. We've all been through a lot, I said, but we can't let this go on any longer. Laura and the HOA think they can control us, but we have the power to change that. Together, we can fight back. We can take back our neighborhood. The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time, I felt a true sense of unity. We weren't alone in this fight. We had each other. After the meeting, we formed a coalition of homeowners, and we began strategizing. Some of us focused on gathering more evidence of the HOA's illegal actions, while others started organizing a petition to bring to the city council. I was amazed at how quickly things were moving. The more we banded together, the more momentum we gained. And it wasn't just about standing up to Laura anymore. It was about sending a message that we wouldn't let anyone take our homes, our land, or our rights. The city council meeting was set for a few weeks later, and we were ready. With all the evidence we had collected, the support of our neighbors, and the knowledge that we were in the right, I knew that this fight was far from over. But now, we had a real chance to win. This wasn't just my battle anymore, it was ours. The day of the city council meeting arrived, and the tension was palpable. I could feel the weight of the moment in the pit of my stomach as I walked into the council chambers. This wasn't just another meeting. This was the turning point. I had spent weeks gathering evidence, meeting with neighbors, and organizing everything we needed to present our case. The HOA had been running roughshod over the community for far too long, and now it was time to put a stop to it. The room was packed, the air thick with anticipation. I could see the familiar faces of my neighbors, all of us united for the same cause. And then there was Laura. She was sitting at the front with her lawyer, just like she always did, acting like she owned the place. But this time, things were different. This time, we weren't going to let her intimidate us. The council meeting began, and the first few items were routine. But when it was our turn to speak, I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath and began. "Good evening, council members," I said, my voice steady despite the nerves. "My name is Jake Williams, and I'm here today to speak on behalf of my family and my neighbors. For years, we've been living under the thumb of an overbearing HOA, led by Laura Harper. But we're done. We're standing up for our rights, and we need your help." I could see Laura shifting in her seat, trying to look confident, but I could tell she wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't expecting the full force of the community to come together like this. I went on to explain how the HOA had been abusing its power, forcing people to pay ridiculous fines for minor violations and trying to take control of the lake that had been in my family for generations. I showed the council the documents, the evidence we had gathered, and explained how Laura had been manipulating the system for her own gain. The room was silent as I spoke. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. When I finished, I sat back down, my hands shaking slightly. But I knew I had said everything I needed to say. The council members looked at each other, murmuring among themselves. I could see them processing the information, weighing the facts. Laura's lawyer stood up, trying to interject, but the council members ignored him, their attention still on us. It was clear that they were taking this seriously. After what felt like an eternity, the council chairperson cleared his throat and addressed the room. "We've heard both sides, and after reviewing the evidence, it's clear that there have been significant issues with the way the HOA has been operating. We will be launching an investigation into these claims." The words hit me like a wave, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to relax. This wasn't over, but it was a huge step forward. Laura sat there, her face pale, unable to speak. The council had spoken, and the tide was turning. This was just the beginning, but it was the moment I knew we had finally taken control of our own futures. The investigation into the HOA's actions moved faster than I expected. Within a few weeks, the council had conducted interviews, reviewed more documents, and had called in experts to assess the legality of the HOA's practices. It was clear that the more they dug, the more they found. Laura's manipulation of the system, the fines, the forced developments, everything was starting to unravel. I kept in close contact with my lawyer throughout the process, making sure we had everything we needed for the next step. Meanwhile, the community was coming together in ways I hadn't imagined. People who had been afraid to speak out were now showing up at council meetings, sharing their stories, and standing up for what was right. It was no longer just my fight. It was everyone's fight. A few weeks later, I received a letter from the city council. They had completed their investigation, and it wasn't just a slap on the wrist for Laura and her HOA. The council had found multiple violations, and they were taking action. The HOA was being fined, and several of their decisions were being overturned. But the most significant part was the recommendation to disband the current HOA board, including Laura. The council was giving the community the chance to rebuild, to form a new HOA, one that would actually serve the people, not control them. When I read that letter, a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. This wasn't just about keeping my land, it was about changing the way things worked for everyone. I called Sarah right away to tell her the news. We both couldn't believe it. After everything we'd been through, it was finally over. But there was still one more thing to do. The council had set a date for the next meeting, where they would announce the dissolution of the old board and elect new members. It felt like a victory, but I knew it wasn't the end. We had to make sure this never happened again. The community needed new leadership, and I wasn't about to let anyone take advantage of the system again. I spent the next few days organizing with my neighbors, making sure we had a solid group ready to step up and take charge. It wasn't just about getting rid of Laura, it was about creating a future where we all had a say. The day of the meeting arrived, and as I walked into the council chambers, I could see the energy in the room. The residents were ready. Laura and her lawyer were nowhere to be seen. It was time to vote, to take control of our community once and for all. When the results came in, it was official. A new HOA board had been elected, and it was made up of people who genuinely cared about the neighborhood and the people who lived there. Laura was gone. The power had shifted. As I walked out of the meeting, I felt a sense of pride that I hadn't felt in years. We had done it. We had fought back, and we had won. It wasn't just about a lake anymore. It was about justice, about taking back control, and about making sure that no one would ever be bullied by an HOA again. The days following the election of the new HOA board felt surreal. It was as if a cloud had been lifted from the neighborhood. People were finally starting to relax again, knowing that the oppressive rule of Laura and her old board was over. I walked around the neighborhood more, chatting with neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out. They thanked me, but I knew it wasn't just me. It was all of us, coming together to make a difference. But even with the new leadership in place, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to be done. I had learned too much about how corrupt the system could be, how easily people like Laura could use their power to control others. The neighborhood was safer now, but I didn't want to ever let something like that happen again. I started thinking about the future, about how we could ensure that the community stayed strong, that people would always have a voice. A few months later, I organized a meeting with the new board members. We needed to set up some new rules, ones that would protect us from anyone who tried to exploit the HOA system again. We worked together to create a set of fair guidelines, ones that would ensure transparency and prevent abuse of power. As we put everything in place, I couldn't help but think about the incredible transformation we had gone through. The road to get here hadn't been easy, and there had been times when I wasn't sure how things would turn out. But now, it felt like we had built something that would last. The neighborhood felt different. People were more engaged, more connected. It wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was about a community coming together, about standing up for what was right and making sure that everyone had a voice. Looking around, I felt proud. I had fought for this land, for my family's legacy, but in the end, it wasn't just my victory. It was a victory for the whole community. The sense of justice, of fairness, had been restored. And I knew that, no matter what happened next, we would never go back to the way things were. We had created something new, something stronger, something that couldn't be taken away. The story wasn't over, but it was a new chapter, one where we had control, where our voices mattered, and where the HOA would never again be able to overstep its bounds. As the months passed, I watched the neighborhood change in ways I hadn't expected. People who had once kept to themselves were now coming together, attending meetings, and sharing their thoughts on how the community should grow. We had built something stronger than just a neighborhood, we had built a real sense of community. The new HOA board was doing its job, but more importantly, the residents were more involved than ever. I would walk down the street, and people would stop to chat, to check in. They weren't just talking about lawns or mailboxes anymore, they were talking about how to make the place they live better for everyone. It felt good. It felt like the kind of place I had dreamed of when I first inherited this land. But as much as I loved what we had accomplished, there was still one more thing I needed to do. The lake. It wasn't just a part of the land, it was a symbol. It had been there for generations, and now it was time to honor that legacy. I started thinking about how I could preserve the lake for future generations. I didn't want it to be something that could be easily sold off or developed. It needed to be protected. I reached out to local environmental organizations to learn more about how I could secure the lake's future. After some research and planning, I was able to establish a conservation easement on the lake, making sure that it would always be protected from development. The process was lengthy, but it was worth it. The lake would remain as it was, a place of peace and beauty for generations to come. I felt a deep sense of pride when the final paperwork was signed. The lake wasn't just mine anymore, it was a part of something bigger. It was part of the community's history, and now it had a future. Looking back, I realized just how far we had come. From the first confrontation with Laura to the community coming together to take control, we had created something that was stronger than any individual or any board. We had built a community where everyone had a voice. A place where we could live in peace, knowing that we would stand up for each other when it mattered most. And as I stood by the lake, watching the sun set over the water, I knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. The future was bright for our community, and we would continue to protect and preserve it, together.